that the anti-American violence we've been seeing around the globe could spread to the U.S.
It's happening in Yemen, in Iran, and in the heart of Iraq's capital. Riots and violence directed at Americans over an insulting video.
Interesting to note, the Secretary of State made no mention of whether terrorists again attacked us on another 9/11 when they killed our ambassador. Meantime, this is the scene in Cairo, Egypt right now, where demonstrators have been fighting with police for days. Earlier, they set off what appeared to be fireworks there. You can see them exploding right over people's heads. A festive touch in a very serious situation, because protests like this one are growing by the hour all around the globe. Some hot spots for you here. You can see they stretch from North Africa to the Middle East into Asia. In Iraq, crowds in Baghdad and Basra chanted anti-American slogans in the streets, and a Shiite Muslim group called the anti-Islam video unforgivable. Others are demanding the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad close down. That's the world's largest American diplomatic mission with some 15,000 employees. In Tehran, hardliners burned the U.S. flag outside the Swiss embassy, which really represents American interests in Iran because we have no diplomatic relations, formally anyway. Riot police stood strong outside that embassy. No report of violence so far. Yemen now, where an apparent airstrike recently killed the country's top al-Qaeda deputy. Hundreds of rioters there tried to storm our embassy. They made it inside the compound, but Yemeni security forces fired into the air and eventually sealed off the area. So that's the overview. Our coverage continues now with the...
That incident left dozens of people injured and killed across Afghanistan. Western organizations like the UN and the U.S. Embassy are taking security...
Look at this. One man held up a paper with an apology that reads, "This is not the behavior of our Islam and prophet." A reminder that Islam is a religion of peace.
It had to be this one. Protesters bashing a heavily fortified door in the Middle Eastern country of Yemen. The sign they've ripped down says Embassy of the United States. Anti-American violence spread in the region today, fueled by anger over a once obscure internet movie that ridicules Islam. A mob attacked but did not break into the U.S. Embassy in Yemen. In telephone calls today, President Obama thanked the president of Yemen for condemning this embassy attack, but he told the president of Egypt that the embassy there needs to be better protected. All of this.
The dishes here.
The people in the neighborhood that we spoke to said it wasn't clear who was behind the attack. A Libyan security guard who tried to defend the compound but was wounded in the attack couldn't tell us either. But he did say it had the marks of a planned assault.
The leading suspect in the attack. The name means supporters of Islamic law, and U.S. officials describe it as an offshoot of al-Qaeda. At least one of the attackers was photographed at the scene, and Libyan officials claim to have already made arrests. Attorney General Eric Holder cut short an overseas trip to return to Washington, and a law enforcement source said the FBI would begin the investigation by interviewing the 30 American survivors of the attack who are now at a U.S. military base in Germany. The attackers struck at 10 p.m. local time Tuesday, and within 15 minutes were inside the compound, firing on the main building, where Ambassador Chris Stevens, Information Manager Sean Smith, and a security officer had already begun destroying classified documents.
Is never any justification for violence. These were the protests at the embassy in Cairo today, and Holly Williams is there.
The protesters have become rioters, fighting running street battles with the Egyptian police, who were out in force. Today, there was chaos as young men threw stones and Molotov cocktails, while security forces countered with tear gas. All of it triggered by the American-made film that deeply offended many Muslims. The film may have been the spark, but these protests feed off deeper tensions laid bare by a revolution that forced Egypt's longtime dictator from power last February. With an Islamist party in power now, anti-American feeling is growing. It was a show of unity with the Islamists who support him and a clear sign of how Egypt's relationship with America is changing.
Wall Street liked it. The Dow soared 206 points.
It's the first time the Federal Reserve has committed to boost the economy every month and keep interest rates low until unemployment goes down. Fed Chairman Ben Bernanke said the economic recovery, especially in the U.S. job market, is stuck. Bernanke says if it works, the plan should increase home buying, help the stock market, and drive up consumer spending. While Wall Street loved the announcement, the Fed's open-ended commitment to keep interest rates low has a downside. It could hurt retirees living on fixed incomes and anyone invested in savings accounts or money market funds.
Day of fury, anti-American protests spread overseas, and we have details tonight on the man behind the film that ignited the Sea of Rage.
From ABC News headquarters, this is ABC World News.
Back some $40 billion worth of mortgage-backed securities each month. What makes today's decision so remarkable is that it's open-ended, meaning that the Fed can print as much money as it wants for as long as it wants. They've tried this type of program twice before, limited versions with only lackluster results.
It isn't growing fast enough to make significant progress reducing the unemployment rate. The weak job market should concern every American.
It has been a day of rage aimed squarely at the U.S. Security forces defending the embassy, hitting hard, firing tear gas, forcing them away. Protesters pushing forward, throwing back tear gas canister. 1,300 miles away in Yemen, demonstrators climbed over a metal fence surrounding the U.S. embassy. They poured through the compound, breaking windows. Frightening scenes, but officials say the protesters did not breach more critical security inside the compound. Images of anger directed at America seen over and over again. Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. Fueling this fury, that online movie called The Innocence of Muslims, which denigrates the Prophet Muhammad. It was produced in America. In Cairo, people in the streets telling us Twitter, a spat broke out between the U.S. Embassy and the ruling Egyptian political party, the Muslim Brotherhood. The embassy warning the Brotherhood that it was reading in Arabic tweets sent from their account, supporting the protesters. By the way, have you checked out your own Arabic feeds? I hope you know we read those too.
There were warning signs. Al-Qaeda's leader urging Libyans to retaliate against Americans for the death of a Libyan-born militant. And the State Department was aware that that anti-Muslim movie was airing on Egyptian TV. Yet there were no warnings about it to other U.S. missions.
The protesters in Yemen set out to destroy the American embassy in Sana'a to punish an insult against Islam. Protesters climbed the perimeter fence, undeterred by Yemeni security forces who tried to keep them back with water cannons. The crowds pushed forward and managed to get inside the embassy parking lot, smashing windows, torching vehicles, using a forklift to do even more damage. This time, the U.S. Embassy was prepared. Staff was moved to a safe location. No one was hurt. In Cairo, another embassy under siege. But Egyptian security forces are finally taking decisive action. Riot police battled demonstrators all day. More than 200 were overcome by tear gas. As the air burned with the stuff, protesters told me their goal was to get to the Cairo embassy and take vengeance. Why, I asked. Because the United States has insulted the prophet, they screamed. Repeated U.S. statements that Washington has no affiliation with the offensive internet movie that sparked this crisis aren't being listened to here, just religious passion and the blindness of a mob. And Egypt's new president isn't doing much to calm things. Announced attacks on foreign embassies. It was a condemnation, but a couched one. Egypt needs the West. Morsi is looking for nearly $5 billion in loans from the International Monetary Fund. The protests in Egypt and Yemen are small, but not isolated. There have been angry demonstrations in 11 countries so far. Half of them in places where Washington supported protesters who toppled their regimes, bringing more democracy, but also unleashing deep hatred and zealotry that is now focused on U.S. properties overseas.
Obama signaled his resolve to find the killers of the 4 Americans.
I want
people around the world to hear me, to all those who would do us harm, no act of terror will go unpunished.
But as the Arab Spring turns to fall, America's old allies, dictators who crack down on anti-American protests, are gone. And the U.S. is not happy with Egypt's newly elected president, Mohamed Morsi's initial failure to protect the U.S. embassy. So telling him he needs to protect American diplomats and the U.S. embassy. But the president acknowledged today the U.S. no longer has a compass for the region. Exactly 19 years ago today, it all seemed so hopeful when Bill Clinton promised the people of the Middle East the quiet miracle of a normal life. As they now grapple with a new world order, the president and his Secretary of State are insisting that the U.S. has no connection to that anti-Muslim video.
It appears to have a deeply cynical purpose.
The world needs American leadership. The Middle East needs American leadership, and I intend to be a president that provides the leadership that America respects and will keep us admired throughout the world.
In the U.S., but U.S. intelligence officials suggested that may have been cover for the assault. Today, the violent demonstrations spread across more of the Muslim world. In Yemen, the U.S. embassy in Sana'a was besieged by thousands of protesters. Some scaled the walls, broke through gates, smashed windows, and set fires. Yemeni security forces battled the demonstrators and finally dispersed them. And in Iraq, hundreds of Shiites took to the streets of Sadr City in Baghdad, where a cleric insisted on action. There were also protests in Iran and in Peshawar, Pakistan, near the Afghan border, where there's a U.S. consulate. Clashes continued outside the U.S. embassy in Cairo as well. Reports from the scene said the street skirmishing was now largely about long-standing tensions with the police and less about religious motivations. Egypt's President Mohamed...
And U.S. officials are very worried. Sources tell me they're especially concerned about today's penetration of the United States Embassy in Tunisia and the reports that the American school in Tunis was actually burned. Remember, the Arab Spring began with such great hope in Tunisia. They're also deeply concerned because other Western nations have become targets as well. Today, mobs in Khartoum in the Sudan attacked the U.S., German, and British embassies. And as we see in these live pictures happening in Egypt, we see some running battles continuing now between demonstrators and police firing tear gas, even though Egypt's powerful Muslim Brotherhood actually called off nationwide protests. Militants also breached an international peacekeeping base in Egypt's northern Sinai, burning trucks and a watchtower. Some 1,500 international peacekeepers have been there since 1981, including 700 U.S. troops. They are there right now. Some of them have been injured, we're told. This is an extremely volatile and dangerous situation unfolding in Sinai right now as well. Our sources also say the U.S. is paying very close attention to what's happening in Gaza. Reuters is reporting at least 30,000 Palestinians burned U.S. flags and beat an effigy of President Obama. The United States ambassador and 3 others killed in Libya were returned to the United States, so that's coming up.
They loved this country.
I think that I don't think it's going to be a complete rupture. Yemen might be a little more extreme, but in the country that really matters the most, Egypt, and even for Libya as well, I think it's going to continue to muddle along. I don't think the American embassy in Egypt is going to be seized the way it was in Iran. But you look at Eastern Europe after 1989, countries like Romania were a mess for years. Indonesia after 1997 and Suharto was overthrown, their 1997, 1998, that was a mess for years as well. So I think it's...
Security contributor Fran Townsend, she was Homeland Security Advisor to President Bush. She serves on both the CIA and the Homeland Security External Advisory Boards. Fran, thanks very much